Hi, everybody. So welcome to the Navigating School Discipline in New York City. My name is Naftali Moore, and I'm joined by my colleague, Ross Baker. Before we get started, I just want to let everybody know that the chat feature is disabled, but we will be having Q&As where you can add questions, and either me or my colleague will be answering it throughout the presentation. We also will be sending these slides so that you guys can have it following the presentation as well. We are going to launch a poll. We just want you to identify yourselves and where you are joining us throughout the city. So we'll just give a few more minutes for people to join. Okay, so thank you guys for joining us today. We are going to get started. So okay, so we will be focusing on navigating school discipline in New York City. So we will be talking about the types of suspensions and parents' rights. We'll be talking about the legal protections for students with disabilities and then some key takeaways. We will leave some few minutes for questions, but again, our chat box is disabled. We do have a poll that just came up, so if you can briefly answer it, and then we'll just start with the presentation. Okay. Okay, so we're going to get started. I do want to talk about school-based supports. So we do have numerous supports that can be offered by the school. Some are a time-limited basis. The first one is the at-risk counseling. That is usually offered on a time-limited basis. It's usually 8 to 12 weeks, and it's for students that are struggling with specific circumstances. So it's not mandated. It's not something that would go on an IEP or a 504 plan, but it's usually provided as needed. And this service may be provided by a social worker, a guidance counselor, or a school psychologist. They also do have other like informal behavior interventions, and this is something that can be implemented by a teacher, a guidance counselor, a classroom para, but it's also for a limited time period. An example of an informal behavioral intervention could be a behavior contract or a chart or a conduct card, attendance monitoring, a points reward system, or using a signal to take a break and see the school's counselor, or to check in the beginning and at the end of the school day. Every school should have a crisis de-escalation plan. It is required under the Chancellor's Regulations A411. And this is basically something that is developed each year that includes strategies for de-escalating behavior crises, identifies locations in the school building where students are having crisis may be safely isolated from others. It also identifies any school staff that's trained in de-escalation techniques. It identifies in-school and community resources available to the school and parent, and also describes how crisis de-escalation and response protocols are communicated to school staff. We also have the school-based mental health services. Every school has some type of mental health support for students. It can be something as like a mental health consultant to help train staff or provide assistance on individual cases. Or it can also go up to having access to a crisis intervention staff during emergencies or having a mental health clinic on site at the school. There are different supports, and there's a list of different supports by school, and it's also available on the on the DOE website. And there's going to be a slide where it actually breaks down what that website looks like and how you can identify it to see if your child's school or your student school has that. And then we also, you can go just one back, there's one more. So the last one is the STH community coordinators. And this is usually assigned to schools that have a large concentration of students in shelters or that are in foster care. So they will receive support from these staffs, and the staff can be either community coordinators or single shepherd mentors. They don't provide mental health services, but they do offer social emotional support to students. Okay. So we do have other school-based mental health services. One is the school response clinicians, and they are licensed social workers who support students facing crises across the city to reduce the practice of school calling 911. We also want to try to reduce the trips to the emergency department. So the central team of clinician social workers are available to assist schools when responding to students in emotional distress, as well as provide professional learning citywide for social workers, schools counselors, and crisis teams. So the school response teams, this is available in about 28 schools, and these teams provide crisis support and interventions, including assessments of individual students and recommended services. They also do provide staff training and mental health referrals for families and students. Then it's the school mental health specialist program, and this is available in about 337 schools. And you'll see the link below on this slide that identifies which school has what services. But for the school mental health specialist program, the specialists deliver trauma-informed group work with students. They also provide mental health education to caretakers and school staff to help address students' mental health needs and also strengthen the community and family ties. The school mental health prevention intervention program is only available in 42 schools, and it helps schools assess needs for mental health services within their building and also partner with community providers or set up school-based programs. They usually offer crisis support, interventions, and training. Then we have the schools with health and hospitals and mental health clinic partnerships, also known as the Pathways to Care. This has started in about 25 schools. It has now expanded to 35, but it's a partnership with child and adolescents outpatient mental health clinics in New York City health and hospitals. And students under 18 can get diagnostic evaluations, ongoing therapy, medication management, and other clinicianal services. And the sessions can be done at the clinic or either via a telemental health platform. But the school or the parent can make referrals for the child who is learning in person or remotely. It's usually supposed to be like a fast track to mental health care. And again, you can see whether your school has that option. We also have the community schools, which is 128 schools, and some of these community schools have mental health services, and they work within the community to provide counseling, training, interventions, and crisis support. The last two is schools with a health center with mental services, and this is available in about 267 schools. So typically a nurse practitioner or a physician assistant or a physician or social worker or a medical assistant or any type of mental health provider can provide these services. They may offer therapy, but not medication management. So it really is a case, or it depends on the program in the school. And then the last one is the schools of mental health clinics. And this is available in about 191 schools. So they offer the full range of services. If you need a psychiatric evaluation, independent and family and group therapy, medication management, crisis intervention, or 24-hour crisis support, you will be able to access those services. And then we also have community coordinators for students in temporary housing. They're assigned to schools with the greatest concentration of students living in shelters or in foster care. So this is the slide that I was referring to where it shows the website and how you can go and actually see if a specific school has this mental health supports. So the website is schoolsearch.schools.nyc. You can type in the name of the school or the address, and then you can scroll down and see what type of supports are available. So if you scroll down, you can see where it says click on mental health and wellness tab. You click that and it drops down and it actually states what that school has available in terms of support. So this is just like what it looks like when you click it, and it's the drop down box. It states exactly what's available at that site and different options as well. So now let's talk about suspension and discipline work. So here at AFC, we specialize in helping families navigate suspensions and school discipline in New York City schools. So we're helping students and young people that are facing juvenile and/or criminal justice system involvement, school suspensions, exclusions from school due to their behavior, or any type of bullying. We're here to advocate for alternatives to discipline and for behavior supports and services so that students can remain in school. So there is adequate research and studies on the impact of suspensions on young people. And in one school year, suspensions led to children missing about over 300,000 days of school, and it's equivalent to 1,756 school years. With that amount of time, a student could have attended a college 439 times. So this is really impacting students who are facing these suspensions or disciplinary actions. So without appropriate supports and interventions, students may be improperly told to stay home or placed on some type of truncated school schedule, sent to a hospital emergency room for behavior that could be managed by the school. And otherwise, this is an exclusion, right? And they're being pushed out of school. So there is data that we did receive from the DOE for the 2021-2022 school year. And during that school year, the DOE issued over 25,000 suspensions and reported an additional 6,600 classroom removals. So that's about 40% of all the suspensions that went to and it concentrated and went to students with disabilities and who were about 21% of the school population. And then we saw that Black students received over half of the superintendent suspensions. And these are suspensions that are lasting from either 6 to 180 days, despite Black students making up about 21% of the DOE enrollment. So with each exclusion from school, students lost days, weeks, or even months of instructional time, and they were disengaged from the school entirely or alienated from the place that they should have been a haven for learning. So now we do have a true and false. We want to know if your child is acting out in school, can a school call you to come and pick up your child early? Your child needs a doctor approval to come back, or after suspension, you will have to meet with the principal before your child can come back to school, or the principal can call the EMS if they think that your child is a danger to themselves and others, or a student can be suspended for a year. So we'll give you some time and then we'll show the answer. So we just launched the poll where you can either put true and false for the options that I just communicated. Okay. So it is false. The school cannot call you to come and pick up your child early. We know that this does happen, unfortunately, but this is not something that the schools can do. So we got false for the first one, great. Also, it is false for the second one. Your child does not need a doctor's approval to come back. Also false for number 3. After suspension, you do not have to meet with the principal before your child can come back to school. Number 4 is a little bit of difficulty. So if your child or the student is presenting a danger to themselves and to others, and these plans like the crisis de-escalation and members who are trained in de-escalation can't really help that student that's going through the emotional crisis, then they can reach out to EMS if they really do believe that student is a danger to themselves or others. And then for the last one, a student can be suspended up to a year, but it really does depend on what is going on. At that point, we really want you to be able to have all that information to see if that suspension is appropriate.
Okay, so I'm gonna take over um, and talk a little bit about types of suspensions and removals in New York City. So my name's Ross, like Tali said before. And again, if you have questions, just use the Q&A feature. But you guys did really well in the polls, so you should congratulate yourselves because they're hard questions. So first, what we have here is the discipline code. So technically, this is supposed to be given to each parent at the beginning of the school year. Um, doesn't always happen, but they're accessible online. You'll see that there are two different covers for the discipline code. That's because there are two different copies of this document. So one is for students from grades kindergarten to fifth grade, and then the other is for students from grades 6 to 12. And I guess before I continue, I know Tali spoke to this a little bit earlier, but it's important to know that one thing that's kind of included in the discipline code is this approach of intervention, positive behavior intervention, and support. So basically, what this means is it's saying that the Department of Education has, by their own admission, a legal standard and a legal practice of trying to intervene and support students with positive behavior interventions rather than immediately going to something punitive like out of school suspension. With that said, uh, because we're on the suspension topic, or portion of the presentation, we are just going to show what this kind of looks like in practice in the discipline code. So there's different levels of infractions. You'll see that each infraction kind of has a code, and these are how the infractions are entered into the school's reporting system, and then also how they're charged in a suspension situation. Um, okay. And then you'll see here that on the left, um, there's supports and interventions that can be used to approach behavioral problems. So on the left, you'll see conflict resolution, functional behavior assessment, mediation, um, many of the things that Tali mentioned earlier as far as behavioral supports. And then the right are the more disciplinary reactions like exclusion from schools, um, superintendent suspensions, suspensions of different lengths. But the reason that these are shown together is because it's really important that um, the school actually makes a demonstrated and committed effort to intervening in a positive manner using some supports and interventions before immediately resorting to a suspension. Okay, so I'm going to talk a little bit about three types of suspension. Um, and I see there's a question in the chat. If a student is hitting teachers, students can the school ask the parent to pick up the student? And this is what we're going to get to in just a second. So these are the like approved types of removals per the Department of Education. So there's a teacher's removal, which is up to 4 days. The parent has a right to ask for a meeting, but a parent must receive a phone call following a teacher's removal. So this is really important because um, in the polls that we launched earlier, uh, there was the answer that was false for a school can ask you to come pick up your kid. And the reason we include that is because that happens all the time, even though it's technically illegal. So um, before a teacher's removal, a school must call a parent and notify them that the student is being removed and explain why. But it's important to note that a teacher's removal is only removal from a certain teacher section. So this isn't like, hey, come pick up your kid, your kid's day is done. This is just removal from a specific classroom. The next step in disciplinary action is a principal suspension, which is up to 5 days. This is sometimes what people think of as an in-school suspension. So typically these suspensions occur on site in an administrative office, but parents must receive written notice. The principal has to hold a conference, and this is exclusion for throughout the entire day. And then a superintendent suspension is from 6 to 20 days. As Tali mentioned before, it can be a lot longer. but this is only for very serious infractions. And this requires formal hearing at a borough suspension office. And again, families must receive written notice within 24 hours of the incident. So no other types of removal are allowed. So, you shouldn't be getting a text from a teacher saying like, "Hey, your kid's done for the day," or something like that. These are the only three types of removals permissible under the DOE's discipline code. So a few other things, like we mentioned before, if you remember the last question of the poll, students actually can be expelled, but the students can only be expelled if they're over 17 years old and do not have an IEP. So no student with an IEP can be expelled, and no student under 17 years old can be expelled. Schools can't use corporal punishment, so schools should not be causing bodily harm to students whatsoever, or anything that is likely or reasonable to create bodily harm or discomfort. This is absolutely not allowed. Again, and importantly, schools can't transfer students without the student's family's permission. Um, this is something that also happens pretty often where a school will suspend a student or say they're going to suspend a student and say to the family, "We want to transfer the student." It's not allowed. The school cannot transfer a student without the permission of whoever has educational rights for the student. So for the principal suspension, written notice is required. Um, it must be delivered to the family or the guardian within 24 hours. So that can be through email, through physical delivery, through picking it up at the school. It should include a statement of students' rights, the reasons for the suspension, including specific information about the date, time, and location, the period of removal and alternative instruction. So this is a key piece. Um, the student is supposed to continue receiving instruction throughout the suspension. It can happen off-site, but typically for a principal suspension, it happens at school in an administrator's office. And then also, this notice must include the date, time, and place of a suspension conference, which is a conference with the principal, where the parent has the opportunity to state their student's case and respond to the charges or what the school is alleging. Students must stay in class until the suspension conference, except if there's a threat of danger. And this is a little tricky because it's if the principal or the admin deems that there's a threat of danger, um, then it can be hard to push back against that. The principal must attend the conference and decide if the suspension is justified. And like I mentioned before, parents have the right to present students' version and question witnesses, a right to an interpreter, and then a right to discuss a plan to address behavior going forward. And for any of this, families have the right to interpretation and the right to receive any notices in their preferred language. So for a superintendent suspension, which is kind of the most severe on the disciplinary side, the schools must get approval from the district superintendent and call the parent immediately once they get approval. Within 24 hours, parents must get a notice including the reasons for suspension, the alternative school location, details about the hearing, so where it will be, a witness list, and then parents' rights and places to call for help. So I'll just highlight a few of these real quick. The alternative school location is the location where student is expected to report during their suspension. The hearing site is typically a borough hearing office. Each borough has one, except for Brooklyn, which has two, one of them representing South Brooklyn and Staten Island. And then parents' rights and places to call for help. That's often how we get suspension cases, which both Talia and I will represent, where families have the right to representation and can reach out to people if they need help. So here's an example of what a superintendent suspension looks like. The parent's information is up top at the left. This middle section in bold has information about where your student is supposed to report during the suspension they're serving. So an important part of suspensions within the New York City Department of Education is that students aren't supposed to miss any education. And we'll talk a little bit more about this, but during a superintendent suspension, students are typically uh, required to report to an alternative learning site. And then at the bottom, you can see uh, where the suspension hearing will take place. In this case, it's the downtown Brooklyn office. Um, And then here's kind of the second part of what a suspension notice looks like. So you'll see what they call the charge at the top. Um, and then there's this standard line, this behavior constitutes a danger to the health, safety, welfare, and morals of your child and others at school. This is included in every suspension. I only highlight this because I've had parents call me and say, like, why are they saying that my student is a danger to the morals of the school, which I think is weird phrasing. But it's just included in the notice. So it's not like individual or specific to an individual child. And then down here, there's a non-binding witness list. So this is who was maybe interviewed during the investigation, who could show up to a suspension hearing. So then the second thing to obtain for during a suspension hearing is a suspension packet. And this is different from the notice because this is what actually uh, has all the information related to the suspension. So any evidence, any witness statements, any videos, any injury reports, the occurrence report, so how the school reported the incident internally in their system, and then a records cover sheet. And the school must provide this to families before the hearing. Um, Technically, giving it to families the morning of the hearing is before, but we always, always, always advocate for families to uh, get this as early as possible and kind of keep asking the school or asking the suspension hearing office, just because it's really important to have this document to know how you want to proceed. And this is just a sample of that records cover sheet. So it has demographic information up top, um, disciplinary history down below, uh, current academic record. And then the second part, which has, um, at the top, examples of interventions that the school has tried before, um, if the student has an IEP or not. And then at the bottom, the principal's recommendation for how long the suspension lasts. And the recommendation is only that, a recommendation. It is by no means the letter of the law and the final say of how long the student will be suspended. And then here's an example of a witness statement. Um, they're pretty basic. There's not a whole lot of information included, but usually person's name, the person's role, and then their account of whatever happened in the incident that's alleged. And then this is the occurrence report, which goes into the school's incident reporting system. So this is just how the school logs it into their reporting system. This, however they log it, doesn't mean that this is exactly what happened. It just means that this is how the school's logging it. But it doesn't count as like evidence or anything like that in a hearing process. So at a superintendent suspension hearing, folks have three options. So the first is adjournment for a good cause. And this can be a few things. Oftentimes, this is families getting to the hearing office and learning that they're actually allowed to have representation because they might not have been provided the full notice that actually has a list of organizations they can reach out to for representation. They could adjourn because of timing issue, anything like that. It is important to note, though, that if a family adjourns rather than the school, the student will be out of school or at the alternative learning center until the date of the hearing. Um, so it just means that the suspension will continue for at least at least until the hearing happens. The next option is to plead no contest. So this is honestly what happens a lot because people don't know what to do, and this is what schools advise because it's the least amount of work. But this is basically saying that you don't uh, agree or accept the charge or disagree with the charges necessarily. It's just saying that you're going to accept them as written, and accept the punishment or the disciplinary response that comes with that. But it's not an admission of guilt or anything like that. And then the third option is to proceed with the hearing. Um, and this takes place at one of the borough suspension hearing sites. Um, so at a suspension hearing, the hearing officer will make a decision based on testimony and all documents and evidence. So within 2 days of the hearing, parents will receive the notification of whether the charges were dismissed or sustained. If they are sustained, where the student is assigned to attend school at the alternative learning site, and then how suspension will be reflected in students' records, including when it will be expunged. So this just means when it will essentially be removed from their records and won't show up or follow them throughout their academic career. And then within 5 days of the hearing office will mail a full report of findings and dispositions to the parent. So this is kind of like a summary of what happened in the hearing, who testified, why the hearing officer did or did not find the testimony credible, and why the hearing office ruled the way they did. And then at the bottom, you can see this, it says students remain at the alternative education site pending the decision unless the parties agree otherwise. So sometimes the school will just say, you can come back, or there will be tests or regions happening, and students will go to the school for those. But until you receive a decision, students typically remain at the alternative education site. So the range of what the superintendent can do is for most infractions, superintendent can immediately reinstate the student to school, continue the suspension for 6 to 10, 11 to 15, or 16 to 20 school days. For very serious behavior, only by the DOE main office approval, continue the suspension for more than 20 school days up to 1 year. This triggers an automatic review for 40 or more school days. And then they also have the opportunity to expel the student. But again, like I mentioned before, this is only possible for students without protections under the Individuals with Disability Education Act, and students who have turned 17 already. Superintendent also can recommend services and grant or deny a school transfer if the parent requests it. So there are processes to appeal a hearing if you feel the decision was incorrect, and the appeal must be done in writing and state grounds for the appeal and the relief requested. So the first level is the Chancellor or Office of Legal Services. And you can file within 20 school days the date of the decision, or 10 school days from receipt of tape recording or hearing transcript. So any hearing is recorded, and you have the right to request the transcript in full, which the hearing office will provide to you. If that appeal is unsuccessful and you still feel like you need to appeal again, you can appeal to the New York State Education Commissioner, which must be initiated within 30 days of the decision from the first appeal. Okay, so we have a little section here for Q&A, but because we have the Q&A feature open, we're just going to continue on. But if you do have questions, please put them in the chat, and we'll either try to answer them through typing, or we will answer them live. But for the next part, I'm going to turn it back over to Tali.
Okay. Thank you, Ross. Okay, so Ross did mention the alternative instruction. So this is a different site. It's not your child or the student's current school, and they will receive homework, classwork, exams, and full-time instructions. And if this sometimes the schools do send students home. This shouldn't happen. If it does happen, you can contact the principal or the assistant principal and let them know that they're not allowed to do this, and request an immediate meeting if necessary. But if the administration or staff resist, you can help and contact the superintendent's office. They do have a phone number on the school's website that you can directly reach out to. Uh, I'm sorry, can you move 1 second?
Um, okay, so sorry, we're having a few technical difficulties, but I'm going to continue on in the meantime. So during a principal suspension or while waiting for a suspension hearing, um, students from kindergarten to eighth grade will receive full-time instruction. So this means they'll receive alternative instruction for the entire school day, whereas high school students have to receive only 2 hours of physical instruction. So what that means is that students should be receiving all of their schoolwork, but they only have to be at the site for 2 hours a day. And then after the suspension hearing, all students who continue to be suspended have the right to full-time instruction.
Okay. Um, So we are now going to discuss the protections for students with disabilities. It is a different process. So there's things like an expedited evaluation, a manifestation determination review, which I will refer to as an MDR, a suspension plan, an FBA, which is a functional behavior assessment, and a BIP, which is a behavior intervention plan. So, who is the student with a disability for discipline purposes, right? So it is a student with an IEP, a student with a 504 plan, or a student that the school should deem to know, right? So for this term for deem to know, the parent either expresses a concern in writing to a teacher or staff that their child may need special education services, or a parent requested an evaluation, or a teacher or even the school staff express either specific concerns about a pattern of the student's behavior to their supervisors, or the child's behaviors in school shows that there is a need for special education services. So if any of those things are presented, then the school has the right to, or is under the deemed to know that this student has a disability. There are exceptions to that, though. I do have to say the parent, if the parent does not consent to evaluations or services, or the evaluation was conducted and the school district determined the student doesn't have a disability, then it will not cover those two things. So the right to an expedited evaluation. If a student is suspended, then they can get an expedited evaluation when the parent requests an initial evaluation or under this deemed to know category. But that must be done 15 days of the parent's consent. So what is an MDR? An MDR is a manifestation determination review. And this is something that is held. It's a meeting to determine if the student behavior was the cause of the student's disability or if it's a result of the school's failure to follow either the student's IEP or the behavior intervention plan. So to determine whether it is a manifestation, the behavior has to be manifesting from the student's disability. Yep. Okay, thanks, perfect. And then if it is a manifestation, then that student cannot be suspended and it immediately has to be reinstated back into school. So that means they return back to their class placement. And there's different things that can happen following that if it is a manifestation. So you can request for the school to do a functional behavior assessment plan is something that we're going to talk about in upcoming slides, and also see if that rises up to the level of having a behavior intervention plan. If it is not a manifestation, then the student can be suspended like other students. During the MDR, school officials identify deficiencies in the student's IEP, in placement, the implementation of the IEP, and they must take immediate steps to remedy those deficiencies. And the suspension plan is a streamlined version of the IEP. So it can include related services, sets, accommodations, transportation, but the suspension plan is usually prepared by the site where the student will serve the suspension, and then students are allowed to make progress towards their IEP goals in that site as well. If a parent does disagree with the MDR decision, they can request an impartial hearing to appeal. The hearing must be done on an expedited basis, which is basically within 15 days. So when must the school hold an MDR? When the student is either suspended for 11 or more days in a row, or within 40 school days, or there is a consecutive like pattern of removals. However, the principals, um, they don't have to like come up with this pattern analysis. So currently, if it's 11 in the 40 rule, then that does trigger an MDR, but an MDR is really, it really is triggered if it's 3 or more occasions for the 11 days, or if it accumulates to a 40-day period, basically. So that's a little thing just to keep a note on because it can be a little tricky. And it has to be in the same school year. It doesn't matter if it happened in different calendar years. An example of this is like a student who gets a principal suspension in like December for one day, and then another principal suspension on another day in the same month for 5 days, or then another month in another for a course for another day. If it all equals up to 11 school days out of the 40 day school period, then it does trigger the MDR. So there's different things that can be reviewed during the MDR. Of course, the IEP is the most important. If there is a FBA and a BIP, that is reviewed, evaluations and teachers' observations, occurrences reports, reports from the parents. And then this other information category can be either provider reports from therapists, it can be from the psychiatrist, it can be medical reports, school progress reports. It can be a report where it includes letters of supports from outside mental health providers as well. So this is a typical sheet that is used during the MDR, and this is what the DOE has to follow, right? So you will receive these slides following the presentation so that you can look at this, and it can also help you prepare in advance for MDRs. But these are things that they really do need to follow, and they go through this list to determine whether it's a manifestation or not. So in preparing for an MDR, it's good to review all the documents, especially the IEP, past evaluations. It's good to either gather other information like letters from therapists, like I mentioned in the last slide. But if a student is not getting all the services, or the school did not follow like things like the behavior intervention plan, then it is going to be very difficult to see how that behavior contributed. So any documents at all that you can bring, teacher statements, observations, anything like that will be very helpful in preparing for the MDR. Okay, so now we're going to discuss the functional behavior assessment, which I've been referring to as the FBA. So this is a special education assessment. And if you do not want the DOE or DOE employee to do an FBA evaluation, you can pay for an independent assessment. Medicaid may or may not cover the cost, so that's something to keep in mind. So the first thing that they're going to look at is the behavior, right? They want to see what behaviors is showing up. They have to note it, and they do this in the process of like doing classroom observations to see what's happening. Okay. So This behavior has to also impede the learning and how the student behavior relates to the environment. So students will be observed in a variety of settings and times throughout the school day over multiple days. And they will observe a student's behavior in order to figure out what the problem behavior is, what the cause is, and what in the environment, including adult interactions, keeps maintaining the behavior problem. Children do behave in certain ways for reasons. So we would like to call this function of the behavior to see what is really going on. But it's really impossible to address unwanted behaviors without first determining the function. So the goal is to give the child the tools to behave well. So what goes in a BIP? A BIP is a behavior intervention plan. So this is data that is collected from the functional behavior assessment. And when it's completed, the team will use the FBA to create the BIP, and that will help to prevent and address behaviors and promote positive behaviors. So information about when and how often the behavior occurs, how severe it is, strategies to stop the behavior from happening, which includes classroom changes or a new school schedule, a safety plan for how to manage the behavior when it does happen. It can be things from like calming the student down or removing the student from the classroom or having a student speak to a trusted adult. Specific school staff can be identified, especially if the child does trust that adult, or a designated place to support the child can also be identified. A schedule to mark progress and set future meetings can also be identified. Um, and how well the BIP is working and seeing if changes need to be made is also something that can be added on the BIP. Okay. So, the main takeaways from this presentation is that schools should try to help students before suspending them. There's different interventions, de-escalations, mental health programs and services that we mentioned. Notice must be provided in writing if they are planning on suspending a student. Please ask for a packet so you know what charges are being brought against your student. And then you can ask for a principal suspension conference. There was a question that I saw in the Q&A whether attorney can attend a principal suspension conference. Attorney can attend. The school is not going to tell you that an attorney can attend, but you most definitely can have an attorney be there. Always get the packet like Ross stated, so you can know the charges and the location for the hearing. And then we're hoping that this all leads to no out of school suspensions. We want to keep students in school so that they're not, facing other problems like missing instructions and school being in their school environment. So thank you so much. We do have a final poll that we're going to launch right now. It's just a survey. Again, if you do need any help or you feel like you need help with either a suspension or school discipline issue, you can please reach out to our helpline. The number is on the slide. We are available Monday through Thursday from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m. And then after the survey, we'll just take a few minutes for questions.
Okay, so thank you everyone so much for joining. Um, right now we'll stop the recording. So if people want to ask something more specific or don't want it as part of the recording, now's the time. But Tali and I will stick around for a few minutes and try to answer specific questions if people have them. And like Tali said at the beginning of the presentation, this information will be sent out to you. So if you have any questions or want to review the information, you can, it should be in your email. And then also, we have a new website. So when it's sent out, you'll also get to see a bunch of resources that are associated with this presentation on our website, like our guide to our MDR, guides to school discipline. So there will be more resources available to you along with all the links included in the presentation.